In 2001, one of the most recognizable names in American aviation was flying over 100 million passengers a year, hundreds of planes, thousands of routes. A brand so embedded in American culture that people named their frequent flyer miles after it. And then, over the next decade, the whole thing came apart. Not because of a crash, not because of a scandal, because of a decision made in a boardroom that looked completely reasonable at the time. This is the story of how an airline destroys itself from the inside. Pan Am was once the unofficial airline of the United States. If you wanted to understand what American power looked like in the middle of the 20th century, you looked at Pan Am, first airline to fly across the Pacific, first to offer transatlantic jet service, first to order the Boeing 747, which they helped design. The founder, Juan Trippe, had a direct line to presidents. He negotiated routes with foreign governments like a diplomat. Pan Am didn't just fly people around the world. It built the infrastructure that made global air travel possible. By the 1960s, Pan Am was ordering planes that didn't exist yet and opening routes that no one had proven would work. That wasn't recklessness. That was the whole strategy. Get there first, build the network, own the market before anyone else figures out it's a market. And it worked for a while. The first crack appeared in 1978. That was the year the United States deregulated its airline industry. Before that, the government decided which airlines flew where and what they could charge. Competition existed, but it was managed, tidy. Pan Am had spent decades building its international empire inside that system, and the system just changed. Overnight, domestic airlines that had been locked out of certain routes could fly anywhere. Prices collapsed. New carriers appeared from nowhere, and Pan Am had a serious problem. It had almost no domestic routes. Its entire network was international, which meant it had no feeder system, no way to pull passengers from smaller American cities into its international hubs. Every other major airline had a domestic backbone. Pan Am was flying people from New York to London and had no good way to get them to New York in the first place. So Pan Am did what a company does when it realizes it has a structural gap. It bought another airline. In 1985, Pan Am acquired National Airlines for $437 million. National had exactly what Pan Am needed: domestic routes, domestic gates, domestic passengers. On paper, it was the piece that completed the puzzle. In practice, it was the beginning of the end. The merger was messy. The cultures didn't fit. National's pilots had different contracts, different seniority systems, different ways of doing everything. Integrating two airlines is not like merging two spreadsheets. It's thousands of people, thousands of daily decisions, thousands of places where friction can turn into failure. And Pan Am was paying for all of it while still trying to run one of the world's most complex international networks. The debt from the acquisition sat on the books and didn't go away. Then 1973 happened in reverse. Oil prices didn't spike, they crashed, which sounds like good news for an airline. But Pan Am had spent years building financial models around fuel costs that suddenly didn't apply anymore. Competitors adjusted faster, and when oil prices eventually swung back up, Pan Am was caught between the debt it was carrying and the cost structure it couldn't shrink fast enough. By the mid-1980s, Pan Am was selling assets to stay alive. It sold its iconic Manhattan headquarters, the Pan Am Building, in 1981 for $400 million. It sold its Pacific routes to United in 1985 for $750 million the Pacific. The routes Juan Trippe had pioneered 50 years earlier opened before World War. Routes that had defined Pan Am as a global carrier, gone sold to cover the bills. Every asset sale bought time, none of them fixed the problem. And then December 21st, 1988, Pan Am Flight 103 departed London Heathrow bound for New York. 38 minutes after takeoff, a bomb hidden inside a radio cassette player in the cargo hold detonated at 31,000 feet. The plane broke apart over Lockerbie, Scotland. 270 people died, all 259 on board and 11 on the ground. The investigation eventually traced the bombing to Libyan intelligence operatives. But in the months that followed, something else happened alongside the criminal inquiry. Passengers stopped flying Pan Am. Bookings collapsed. Not because Pan Am had done anything wrong, because the name was now permanently attached to the worst terrorist attack in aviation history at that point. Travel agents steered people away. Corporate accounts canceled. The brand that had once represented American prestige and reach now made people think of a fireball over Scotland. Pan Am was already weakened. Lockerbie didn't sink it on its own, but it accelerated everything. The recovery that might have been possible 2 years earlier was now almost certainly not. By 1991, Pan Am filed for bankruptcy. This was not a sudden collapse. It was a slow unwinding that had been happening for over a decade, each bad decision layering onto the last one, each crisis arriving before the previous one was resolved. In the bankruptcy, Delta acquired most of what was left: the transatlantic routes, the Frankfurt hub, the shuttle operation between Boston, New York, and Washington. The assets that had taken 50 years to build were carved up and absorbed into competitors in a matter of months. On December 4th, 1991, Pan Am ceased operations. Stranded passengers were stuck at airports. Employees found out their jobs were gone through news reports. One of the most storied brands in the history of transportation simply stopped existing. So what was the $50 billion mistake? It wasn't one decision. It was a sequence of decisions, each of which had logic behind it, each of which made sense in isolation and was catastrophic in combination. The people running Pan Am were not incompetent. They were flying a plane that had too much weight on it, and every solution they tried involved throwing something else overboard to keep altitude. It pioneered routes that became some of the most profitable in aviation history. The transatlantic network it built from scratch is still the backbone of international aviation today. Pan Am was right about almost everything. It just couldn't survive long enough to collect on any of it. When it was gone, the routes it had spent 50 years building just moved to other airlines and kept producing money. The network survived, the company didn't. That's probably the part that stays with you. Pan Am built something real, something that lasted, and someone else is still flying it today.